This is Jonathan Zapp reading from Crossing the Event Horizon, Human and AI Metamorphosis and the Singularity Archetype. This is Chapter 3, Logos Beheld, though chapter order could change, but this is probably going to be correct. And I'm pointing the camera at the screen, so if you want to review any words, and also so you can see some of the images, which you should look at right now. There you see some eye spirals that Tanner Derry generated through some AI program. One more of those. And then this is a stone plaque where you see a spiral coming off of an eye. An eye with a spiral is the ideal symbol of the singularity archetype. The image is of a stone plaque I got from a Boulder thrift store. It's signed B. Guano, 795, possibly a play on bat guano. Uncanny eyes. From my earliest encounters with the singularity archetype in the 70s, it was apparent that uncanny eyes, spirals, and visual telepathies were consistent motifs. If you wanted to reduce the singularity archetype to an iconic symbol, it would be an eye at the center of a spiral. The earliest instance I found of the uncanny eye motif in an expression of the singularity archetype is in the Bible, Revelation 4:6. And before the throne there was a sea of glass, like unto crystal, and in the midst of the throne, and round about the throne, were four beasts full of eyes before and behind. The four beasts are covered with eyes, and before the throne is the most optically pure and light conductive material, glass like unto crystal. Uncanny eyes also feature prominently in modern apocalyptic visions. For example, a Japanese man dreamed the following on August 24, 1945, about 3 weeks after experiencing the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima. I was in Tokyo after the great earthquake, and around me were decomposing bodies heaped in piles, all of whom were looking right at me. I saw an eye sitting in the palm of a girl's hand. Suddenly it turned and leaped into the sky and then came flying back toward me, so that looking up I could see a great bare eyeball, bigger than life, hovering over my head, staring point blank at me. I was powerless to move. I awakened short of breath and my heart pounding. One of my first encounters with the singularity archetype as a child was watching the movie The Village of the Damned, which featured mutant children with light-transmitting eyes and telepathic communication. In the novel by John Wyndham, on which the movie was based, The Midwich Cuckoos, the new children's eyes are described as follows. The eyes, however, were more remarkable than he had been led to expect. He had been told of the curious golden color of their irises, but no one had succeeded in conveying to him their striking lambency, their strange effect of being softly lit from within. In Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, the mule is a powerful mutant whose telepathic powers allow him to manipulate the emotions of entire planetary populations. The mule, incognito as Magnifico Giganticus, the clown, is described, "He's a man of overpowering might, respected sir, and cruel in the use of his power, and his eyes, respected sir, no one sees." What's that? What's that last? He wears spectacles, respected sir, of a curious nature. It is said that they are opaque, and that he sees by a powerful magic that far transcends human powers. I have heard, and his voice was small and mysterious, that to see his eyes is to see death, that he kills with his eyes, respected sir. And that's from Isaac Asimov, Foundation and Empire. Magnifico is a virtuoso of the visisonar, an instrument that uses radiation on the optic nerve to produce mystical images of pulsing color that people simultaneously perceive differently. The New Mutants are almost always described as being able to transmit linguistic content through their eyes or some other visual medium. For example, consider this description from Theodore Sturgeon's 1953 science fiction novel, More Than Human. Thompson took off his glasses. He had wide, round eyes. He had wide, round eyes, just the color and luminescence of a black and white television screen. The irises showed the whites all the way around. They were perfectly round, and they looked as if they were about to spin. What is most interesting about this description is that the eyes are compared to a television screen, a medium that communicates both images and words. So it's sort of suggestive of visual telepathy, in other words. In Frank Herbert's classic 1965 science fiction novel, Dune, there are frequent descriptions of uncanny eyes. People who take the visionary spice melange, the most precious substance in the universe, and a catalyst for parapsychological abilities, develop eyes that are all irises. It is said of Paul's younger sister Alia that her eyes kill our enemies and torment the unbelievers. In Dune Messiah, Paul's eyes are destroyed by a stone burner, a type of nuclear device, but he retains his ability to see through prescience. The visual transcends the verbal. In The Medusa Touch, Peter Van Greenaway's novel about a man with the ability to create catastrophes with his mind, the main character's eyes are continually emphasized. Eyes, extraordinary, luminous eyes, like dice flung into a plate of cold porridge, features defying one to look twice, but even in a poor photograph, those eyes were of such an incredible intensity. Another quote, I cannot describe the ultimate transformation of those features, discomposing flesh set with diamonds. It was as if I gazed through a Dadaist exterior at a crystal skull, as if I physically saw through him, into him, nothing alive beyond the transparency except eyes fired by preternatural intent. Quite the most intense, these are continuing quotes from that book, quite the most intense, almost mesmeric eyes I've ever seen. Best looked at through smoked glass kind of a thing. Twin seals of absolute authority. It creates difficulties, of course, trying to separate visual fascination from verbal statements. Influenced by one, you're bound to accept the other. The last sentence of this final quote reveals something of great interest. Trying to separate visual fascination from verbal statements. Influenced by one, you're bound to accept the other. Essentially, it implies that visual communication trumps verbal communication, and that principle is implicit in so many versions of the singularity archetype. Visual telepathic communication transcends ordinary communication. The visual telepathy theme continues in More Than Human. The probe that passes invisibly from his brain through his eyes into mine. Two characters who have never met in any conventional way are already aware of each other through silent, radiant communication. She had been aware of him for days, and he of her, and now their silent radiations reached out to each other, mixed and mingled and meshed. In Stephen King's 1977 horror novel, The Shining, shining is a modality of visual telepathy. Danny, a 5-year-old boy, is an empath whose intuitions and perceptions of his parents' unexpressed thoughts are described in terms of colors. Adult thoughts beyond his limited experience to comprehend and interpret come to him only as colors and moods. His father's divorce thoughts are described as more complex, colored dark violet and shot through with frightening veins of pure black. Halloran, a caretaker of the Overlook Hotel in Colorado, is in Florida when he hears Danny's telepathic call for help. King describes their bond. He knew the boy. They had shared each other the way good friends can't, even after 40 years of it. He knew the boy, and the boy knew him, because they each had a kind of searchlight in their heads, something they hadn't asked for, something that had just been given. No, you got a flashlight, he the one with the searchlight. And sometimes that light, that shine, seemed like a pretty good thing. Haunting the Overlook is a collectivized entity of negative light. It is described alternately as a huge obscene manta and a whirling blackness dancing like negative motes of light. Those are all from Stephen King's The Shining. The Eye as Evolution's Stargate. In Arthur C. Clarke's 1968 science fiction novel, 2001: A Space Odyssey, the Stargate through which the protagonist, Bowman, crosses the evolutionary event horizon is compared to an eye. He looks out at the white surface of the moon, Iapetus, and contrary to ocular vision, perceives the satellite was a huge empty eye staring at him as he approached. It was an eye without a pupil, for nowhere could he see anything to mar its perfect blankness. Not until the ship was only 50,000 miles out did he notice the tiny black dot at the exact center of the ellipse. The pupil of the eye turns out to be a monolith. Early in the book, another monolith appears that is described as having a pulsing aura of light. This monolith uses rhythmic light to reprogram a group of missing link hominids in an evolutionary intervention that leads to Homo sapiens and eventually space travel. Bowman attempts to land on the giant monolith on Iapetus and discovers it to be a stargate, an infinitely receding corridor where he is bombarded with mind-blowing images. On the other side of the evolutionary event horizon, Bowman becomes the Star Child, an infant with eyes that already held more than human intentness. In the 1968 film, 2001, the Star Child looks like a fetal version of a classic gray alien, the large-eyed beings universally reported to communicate telepathically with abductees and other experiencers. The Eye, the Cambrian Explosion, and the Light Switch Theory. That eyes should be associated with a future quantum evolutionary change seems strangely appropriate, as the development of eyes may have been the catalyst for quantum evolutionary change in the distant past. Andrew Parker, an Oxford University zoologist, in his book In the Blink of an Eye, has developed a light switch theory to explain the Cambrian explosion, one of paleontology's greatest mysteries. Approximately 544 million years ago, there was an explosion of new life forms. As Parker puts it, 544 million years ago, there were indeed 3 animal phyla with their variety of external forms, but at 538 million years ago, there were 38, the same number that exists today. According to the light switch theory, the relatively abrupt evolution of vision made active predation possible, and this created tremendous pressure on prey to adopt novel ways of avoiding detection. With the dawn of vision, new habitats opened up. I think I should add it. Avoid detection and flee prey. With the dawn of vision, new habitats opened up. Inter- and intra-species relations became more complex, and organisms specialized and differentiated to deal with this quantum evolutionary shift. And the book I'm referring to is In the Blink of an Eye by Andrew Parker. The Alphabet versus the Goddess and the Master and his Emissary. The current phase of human evolution is a complex tangle of evolutionary and devolutionary trends. I must admit that when I wrote the first edition in 2011, I saw more positive trends in human consciousness than I do now. I place great emphasis on the transformative aspects of the growing visual richness of our world. I remember when they were small children watching a Marvel movie with my 2 godsons. During the opening credits, there was a surreal montage of flashing cuts, yet they effortlessly decoded the underlying narrative and explained it to me. I saw great benefits to their being exposed from the earliest age to much complex, surreal visual material. For them, now that they are grown into young adulthood, I can see that they absolutely did benefit from this cultural and technological shift, which has spurred their technical and creative sophistication. I am close to some other Gen Zs who seem similarly enhanced. Unfortunately, however, those few Gen Zs I'm privileged to be close to are outliers, and when I look at their generation, and people of all living generations as a whole, I see potent devolutionary forces at work. Social media algorithms, various online arousal addictions to pornography, polarizing misinformation, TikTok and Instagram reels, and other such varieties of brain-rotting digital fentanyl. Research by Jonathan Haidt and others shows that the nearly universal adoption of smartphones in 2015 and the COVID lockdown of 2020 have led to a deterioration in social skills, the ability to sustain attention, and sharp increases in anxiety, depression, and suicide, especially in adolescence. Some can still thrive in our boiling cauldron of evolutionary and devolutionary trends, but large parts of the population seem overwhelmed by it and are clearly not thriving. Many live in a medicated, apathetic twilight state with fractured attention and social bonds. This is a time of exponential novelty, and for most, that's simply too destabilizing to be of developmental benefit. A zone of novelty usually means that the outer edge of light and the outer edge of dark are both intensified, and the novelty is like the increased frequency and amplitude between these two charged poles. To live in a zone of exponential novelty is to live in the opening words of Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. In 2011, I was influenced by Leonard Shlain's fascinating book, The Alphabet versus the Goddess, which I described as intriguing but flawed. I pointed out ways in which he oversold his case, simplified evidence to fit his theory, and conflated correlation with causation, but I had not yet encountered some of the later criticism. Shlain's book was published in 1998, and he died in 2009, the same year that philosopher, psychiatrist, and literary scholar Ian McGilchrist published his magisterial book, The Master and His Emissary. Shlain oversimplified hemispheric lateralization, attributing image processing to the right hemisphere and textuality to the left, while McGilchrist showed that both hemispheres process both, but with a decidedly different emphasis. McGilchrist and others have pointed out flaws in Shlain's perspective, while there continues to be considerable value in his narrative of Homo sapiens' transforming relationship to word and image. For example, Shlain makes some interesting observations about the Bible. The second of the 10 Commandments says essentially, "Thou shalt not create images," while we have to drop down to the 6th commandment before we find a prohibition against murder. From Exodus 24, the 2nd commandment reads, "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the water under the earth." The 2nd commandment is popularly interpreted as being against idol worship, but is actually a ban on all representational art. This taboo is repeated throughout the Torah. For example, from Deuteronomy 4:15 to 18, "Take ye therefore good heed unto yourselves, lest ye corrupt yourselves, and make you a graven image, the similitude of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any beast that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged fowl that flieth in the air, the likeness of anything that creepeth on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the waters beneath the earth." Clearly, the 2nd commandment is not just a ban on idols. However, the etymology of the word idol is interesting and relevant. Idol derives from the Latin word idolum, and idolum derives from eidolon, the Greek word for image. Yahweh's first instruction to Adam in Genesis is to attach word labels to things. Adam's left hemispheric ability to name things gives him dominion over them. We are living in a time of advancing visual technologies saturating our world with visual information, and this has already caused profound changes in perception and communication. While I no longer give much credence to Schleyen's simplistic formulation that a more visual culture will bring an end to left hemisphere dominance and make people more feminine and less patriarchal, I do see a more visually sophisticated consciousness as a progenitor of an evolutionary jump, as I will develop presently. Terence McKenna, a Logos Beheld visionary. The late Terence McKenna was a visionary genius I met in the 90s who had many crucial insights related to the singularity archetype. From my first contact with Terence's ideas, I was astounded by the parallels between the conclusions I had reached in the 70s and those Terence had arrived at traveling a very different path. One of the strongest areas of convergence was the prediction of visual telepathy as we approached the evolutionary event horizon. The title of this section, Logos Beheld, comes from comments Terence made in his book, The Archaic Revival, about Philo Judaeus, an Alexandrian Jewish philosopher who was a contemporary of Christ. I always think, I wish I could do Terence's voice as Joshua Cutchin can, but trying to imagine it. I always think of Philo Judaeus writing on the Logos. He posed himself the question, what would be a more perfect logos? And then he answered, saying it would be a logos that is not heard but beheld. And he imagined a communication where the ears would not be the primary receptors, but the eyes would be. A language where meaning was not constructed through a dictionary of spoken words, but where three-dimensional objects were actually generated with a kind of hyperlanguage, so there was perfect understanding between people. This may sound bizarre in ordinary reality, but these forms of synesthesia and synesthesic glossolalia are commonplace in psychedelic states. For an account of my discourse with Terence, see A Mutant Convergence, how John Major Jenkins, Jonathan Zapp, and Terence McKenna met during a weekend of high strangeness in 1996. You can find that on zapporacle.com. Look at the screen to see the URL, but it's easier just to enter Mutant Convergence to bring it up in the search window. A telepathic synesthesia. A possible early biblical example of the sort of synesthesia Terence is referring to can be found in Exodus 20:18. And all the people were seeing the sounds. That's in the Bible. Terence refers to the tribal hallucinogen ayahuasca as a catalyst for telepathic synesthesia. Anthropologists once called ayahuasca telepathine because of persistent reports that it produced telepathic states. Reportedly, individuals in a group ayahuasca experience can sing nonverbal songs that will be experienced by the entire group as changing colored forms. Musical intentionality occurs as both sound and imagery, and afterwards, different individuals in the group will describe the visual sympathy using the same adjectives of color and shape. Terence reports from first-hand experience. My experiences with shamanic hallucinogens, especially ayahuasca used in the upper Amazon basin, had shown me the reality of vocal performances that are experienced as visual. The magical songs of the ayahuasqueros, the folk medicos of the Indians, and mestizos of the jungle back rivers are not song as we understand the term. Rather, they are intended to be seen and to be judged primarily as visual works of art. To those intoxicated and adrift upon the visionary reveries unleashed by the brew, The singing voice of the shaman has become a magical airbrush of color and organized imagery that is breathtaking in its alien and cosmic grandeur. So I'm going to see if I can pause this. See what happens. Okay, this is the value of reading aloud. I discovered that this would be a perfect place to insert a very relevant scene from Parallel Journeys. So, a new addition to the chapter. In the first book of my sci-fi series, Parallel Journeys, there is an example of visual telepathy and an explanation of how it works. My mind is a swirl of questions, and there are too many to choose just one. Suddenly, a glowing question mark materializes in the smoke rising from the fire. It's bright green and bloated like a balloon. It floats before us for a moment and then pops like a bubble. Just as quickly as it goes, a vast proliferation of similar question marks fills the space around us, like rapidly popping popcorn kernels. Each is multicolored and uniquely shaped. They flash into existence, flittering around us like weightless confetti, glowing colorfully in the night. In a cascade of pops, the question marks disappear into nothingness. Jeremiah smiles at me, his grin almost childlike. "Don't worry," he says. "We'll get to all of them." I let out a breath. "How did you do that?" I ask. "Was that something you created in advance?" "Not consciously," replies Jeremiah. "I just have a general idea of what I want, and some larger mind manifests it." He pauses to add wood to the fire, which crackles and sends up a plume of sparks. "It's like how dreams occur," he continues. "We don't design every detail of a dream in advance, do we? And yet dreams are far more complex than what I just created." "Even the dreams of ordinary people," he says, "are as dazzling and multi-layered as a David Lynch film." Correcting as I go here. And yet they're invented on the fly. My theory is that they're generated in spontaneous collaboration with the cosmos. Conjuring the question marks was a spontaneous collaboration of that sort. It's something like lucid dreaming. The field of infinite potential recognizes imaginative intentions and realizes them for you, generating images as effortlessly as a dream. The telepathic state is like a mutual dream where our imaginations may collaborate, and usually without the need for conscious direction. I intended to manifest the question marks, and then it's as if some larger processing power rendered the details. And when two people have a strong telepathic rapport, visualizations don't have to be consciously summoned by one or the other. Once you become used to this way of interacting with people, it's almost painful to remember the limitations we once had. Now it seems hard to believe that we could only make these little mouth noises prior to this evolution. The telepathic state is like a mutual dream where our imaginations may collaborate, and usually without the need for conscious direction. I intended to manifest the question marks, and then it's as if some larger processing power rendered the details. Okay. And when two people have a strong telepathic rapport, visualizations don't have to be consciously summoned by one or the other. Once you become used to this way of interacting with people, it's almost painful to remember. Okay, it looks like I've duplicated something there. I'll have to straighten that out. As Jeremiah falls silent, a vision appears. It's like a Hudson River School landscape painting of the Old West, but it lives and breathes. The dying embers of a spectacular sunset illuminate two Native American camps. They're separated by a deep canyon with a river flowing far below. The teepees of each camp are conical silhouettes against the reddish-orange horizon. The natives surround large campfires, flapping blankets to relay smoke signals across the canyon. It's a beautiful evocation of an old way of communication. Smoke signals and mouth noises were high magic in their time. I stand corrected, says Jeremiah. A butterfly should not view caterpillars as inferior, but as beautiful and necessary manifestations of its own life cycle. McKenna makes the case that a visually beheld language be far superior to a verbal auditory language. He was in an interesting position to make such a claim because he was the most articulate and witty speaker of the English language that I've ever encountered. Terence operated at the glowing edge of the spoken language performance envelope. Since Terence is also uniquely eloquent, I won't try to paraphrase him. What follows is an excerpt from a talk he gave in LA in 1987 entitled Understanding and Imagination in the Light of Nature. What we need is to see what we mean. It's not without consequence or implication that when we try to communicate the notion of clarity of speech, we always shift into visual metaphors. Insert an image there. When we try to communicate the notion of clarity of speech, we always shift into visual metaphors. I see what you mean. He painted a picture. His description was very colorful. It means that when we intend to indicate a lack of ambiguity in communication, we shift to visual analogies. This can in fact be actualized. And in fact, this is what is happening in the psychedelic experience. There we discover, just under the surface of human biological organization, the next level in the organization of language, the ability to generate some kind of acoustical hologram that is manipulated by linguistic intent. Now, don't ask me how this happens, because nobody knows how it happens. At this point, it's magic. Nevertheless, the fact is, it does happen. You can have this experience. It represents a synesthesia in the presence of ongoing communication. It is, in fact, telepathy. It is not what we thought telepathy would be, which I suppose if you're like me, you imagine telepathy would be hearing what other people think. It isn't that. It's seeing what other people mean, and then also seeing them also seeing what they mean. So that once something has been communicated, both parties can walk around it and look at it the way you study a Brancusi or a Henry Moore in an art gallery. By eliminating the ambiguity of the audio signal and substituting the concreteness of the visual image, the membrane of separation that allows the fiction of our individuality can be temporarily overcome. And the temporary overcoming of the illusion of individuality is a much richer notion of ego death than the kind of white light null states that it has been imagined to be. Because the overcoming of the illusion of individuality has political consequences. The political consequences are that one can love one's neighbor because the commonality of being is felt, not reasoned toward or propagandized into or reinforced, but felt. Cephalopods and becoming your linguistic intent. Terence frequently referred to cephalopods, especially octopi, to make his case for logos beheld communication. Terence said a great many things about cephalopods at many times and places. It's probably safer to take his reflections on cephalopods as an extended zoological metaphor about our own state of evolutionary metaphor, as some of what he says about cephalopods is scientifically valid, while in other cases he overreaches and purposefully mythologizes octopi in ways that are quite archetypally fascinating and relevant, but not supported by scientific data. But even when Terence exaggerates or confabulates, the underlying ideas are often extremely valuable. This is Terence speaking again. I was drawn to look, strangely enough, at cephalopods, octopi, because I thought, first of all, they were extremely alien. The break between our line of development in the phylogenetic tree and the mollusca, which is what a cephalopod is about 700 million years ago. Nevertheless, and many of you who are students of evolution know that when evolutionists talk about parallel evolution, They always bring out the example of the optical system of the octopi because isn't this astonishing? It's very much like the human eye, and yet it developed entirely independently. This shows how the same set of external factors impinging on a raw gene pool will inevitably sculpt the same organs or attain the same end, and so forth and so on. Well, the optical capacity of octopi is one thing. What interested me was their linguistic organization. They are virtually entirely nervous system. First of all, they have 8 arms in the case of the octopods and 10 arms in the case of the squid, the decapods. So coordinating all these organs of manipulation has given them a very capable nervous system as well as a highly evolved ocular system. But what is really interesting about them is that they communicate with each other by changing the color and texture of their skin and their physical shape. You may know that octopi could change colors, but you may have thought it was camouflage or something very passive like that. It isn't that at all. They have a vast repertoire of traveling bars, dots, blushes, merging pastels, herringbone patterns, tweeds, mottled this and that's, can blush from apricot through teal into dove gray and on to olive. Do all of these things communicating to each other. This is what their large optical system is for. It is to be able to see each other. The other thing which octopi can do, besides having these chromatophores on the surface of their skin, they can change the texture of the skin surface, can make it rugose, papillide, smooth, lobed, rubbery, runneled, so forth and so on. And then, of course, being shellless mollusks, they can hide arms and display certain parts of themselves and carry on a dance. When you analyze what is going on here, what at first seems like merely fascinating facts from natural history begins to take on a more profound aspect, because it is an ontological transformation of language that is going on in front of you. Note that by being able to communicate visually, they have no need of a conventionalized, culturally reinforced dictionary. Rather, they experience pure intent of each other without ambiguity because each octopus can see what is meant. This is very important, can see what is meant. And I think this heralds, or could be made to herald, a transformation in our own definitions of language and communication. In the Archaic Revival, Terence adds, an octopus does not communicate with spoken words as we do, even though water is a good medium for acoustical signaling. Rather, the octopus becomes its own linguistic intent. The octopus is like a naked nervous system, say rather a naked mind. The inner states, the thoughts, if you will, of the octopus are directly reflected in its outward appearance. It is as though the octopus were wearing its mind on its exterior. This is in fact the case. The octopus literally dances its thoughts through expression of a series of color changes and position changes that require no local linguistic conventions for understanding, as do our words and sentences. In the world of the octopus, to behold is to understand. The octopus does not transmit its linguistic intent, it becomes its linguistic intent. The mind and the body of the octopus are the same and are equally visible. This means that the octopus wears its language like a kind of second skin. It appears to be and becomes what it seeks to mean. In the first edition, I assumed too much that Terence had done intellectual due diligence with his factual assertions. Later, both his brother Dennis, this is actually a footnote, and his colleague and friend, Dr. Bruce Damer, with whom I discussed the matter extensively, outed Terence as more of a colorful raconteur and showman than careful researcher. I have not vetted Terence's ideas about cephalopods with any cephalopod authorities, and I did challenge Terence to his face on his bogus TimeWave 2000 predictive algorithm and the inconsistencies in his thinking about novelty. See my article. You can search for this on Zap Oracle on the disillusioning revelations about Terence McKenna. A parallel example to Terence's understanding of cephalopods as creatures that can wear their language on their skin is Ray Bradbury's 1951 science fiction classic, The Illustrated Man. In 1951, being covered with tattoos was unusual and very likely meant that you were a circus freak. The illustrated man is covered with living, linguistically dense tattoos. Quoting from the novel. For he was a riot of rockets and fountains and people, in such intricate detail and color that you could hear the voices murmuring small and muted from the crowds that inhabited his body. Each illustration is a little story. If you watch them, in a few minutes they tell you a tale. In 3 hours of looking, you could see 18 or 20 stories acted right on my body. You could hear voices and think thoughts. The illustrated man got the tattoos from a little old witch from the future. One moment she looked 1,000 years old, and the next 20 years old. That's another quote from the illustrated man. In other words, he got his illustrated skin from a shapeshifter, the most logos beheld body type, like what Terence says about the cephalopods, in other words. Presently, being adorned with tattoos is more socially acceptable. My closest friend, Justin Settlemyer, is a master tattoo artist who works with clients to help them wear their ascendant archetypal life themes on their skin. Justin has taught me that one of the strongest expressions of Japanese aesthetics is irizumi, the ancient art of traditional Japanese tattooing, characterized by large-scale compositions, mythological imagery, and a symbolic vocabulary developed over centuries. Justin's approach includes another singularity archetype theme, hybridization, as he merges Celtic, Viking, Native American, and Japanese motifs with spontaneous fluidity. Although tattoos and Justin Settlemyer's work can be found at justin2pain.com and on Instagram at justin2pain. Although tattoos are painful and expensive, people are motivated to acquire them to be able to externalize linguistic intent onto their skin. The tattoos that people get usually come from their most personal mythologies and can be seen as consciously created dream fragments or image stories worn on the skin in what amounts to a partial form of shapeshifting. As we'll see in chapter, I don't know the number yet, tattooing and other forms of body modification are motivated by what I call the glorified body. The high technology way to become our linguistic intent is virtual reality. As Terence speculates, like the octopus, our destiny is to become what we think, to have our thoughts become our bodies, and our bodies become our thoughts. This is the essence of a more perfect logos, a logos not heard, but beheld. VR can help here, for electronics can change vocal utterance into visually beheld colored output in the virtual reality. The ambiguity of invisible meanings that attend audio speech is replaced by the unambiguous topology of meanings beheld. At last we will truly see what we mean, and we will see what others mean too, for cyberspace will be a dimension where anything that can be imagined can be made to seem real. Of course, Terence is hardly alone in imagining a virtual reality future for the species. In his 1984 pioneer cyberpunk novel, Neuromancer, William Gibson introduces the concept of cyberspace. Quote, a consensual hallucination experienced daily by billions of legitimate operators in every nation, a graphic representation of data abstracted from the banks of every computer in the human system, unthinkable complexity, lines of light ranged in the non-space of the mind, clusters and constellations of data like city lights receding, unquote. In the future of virtual reality, as Terence and others have imagined, VR is not merely a new development, but something we become, a new medium for being. In a 1989 interview, Terence remarked, when the world's being run by machines, we'll all be at the movies, oh boy. Interviewer, or making movies. Terence, or being movies. As Terence sees it, In the not too distant future, men and women may shed the monkey body to become virtual octopi swimming in a silicone sea. One moment. Although Terence's metaphor sounds exotic and far off, much of the transformation he is talking about is not only underway, it's been ongoing for more than a century. Everyone reading this has spent their lifetime being transformed by an intensifying vortex of technological change. Consider the change experienced in just 3 generations. My maternal grandfather grew up in a Latvian village that had no electricity. Maybe 19th century Latvian Jewish shtetls were a bit of a backwater, but my father was born in New York City in 1919. In 1919, even in New York City, there were no commercial radio stations and wouldn't be for a few more years. When my father was born, the most high-tech medium available was the silent film, but he lived long enough to surf the web. Early viewers of silent films had trouble processing what they were seeing. When the zoom lens was first introduced and used to zoom in on a woman's face, people in the audience gasped. The woman's face was getting bigger. But nowadays, the opening credits of a movie might involve a series of rapidly unfolding surreal montages, and yet even children comprehend them. Pamela Reynolds, whose extraordinary near-death experience we'll examine in the next chapter, described her passage through the tunnel this way. It was like the Wizard of Oz being taken up in a tornado vortex, only you're not spinning around. With that image in mind, consider how Dorothy's tornado has evolved. When The Wizard of Oz came out in 1939, audiences saw Dorothy pulled out of the black and white world of Kansas by the spiraling vortex of a tornado. The technological tornado acted as an interdimensional portal for both Dorothy and the audience when it delivered them into the Technicolor world of Oz. Everyone reading this has been born inside this tornado and can reflect with amazement at the technological innovations occurring in their lifespan, within their lifespan. When my father was born, silent film was the most high-tech image projection in the world. But recently, I saw The Wizard of Oz upscaled and reimagined for the Las Vegas Sphere, which as of 2026 has the most advanced sound and image projection system in the world. The Sphere's interior wraps audiences in a 4-acre, 16K resolution LED screen with over 170 million pixels. Its audio system deploys 167,000 individually programmable speaker drivers using 3D audio beaming technology that can direct separate sound beams to individual seats simultaneously. I'm going to put in a check there. I'm not sure about that 170 million. That might be per inch or something. 10,000 seats are equipped with infrasound haptic systems. When the tornado hit, you didn't just see and hear it. You felt it move through your body. Scent and wind effects complete the sensory envelope. Dorothy's tornado has never been more immersive, and the experience makes viscerally clear how far we have traveled from the silent film my father was born into. And perhaps I should clarify, this was the original film, but they had ingeniously upscaled it. It wasn't a new film. But they added new elements because there were all kinds of shots where, the aspect ratio cut off somebody, who was standing to the side. So they had to add new visual information that would seamlessly, this is me speaking on the cuff, fill in, missing scenes and stuff like that, the missing wider parts of scenes and so on. Since the early 90s, I foresaw a couple of upcoming breakthroughs that will greatly empower the Logos Beheld function of technology. The closest one will be when we perfect relatively inexpensive, widescreen, high-definition video display glasses that will allow a much more immersive visual and augmented reality experience. Currently, we have some of that with Apple's Vision Pro headset, but it is certainly not inexpensive. Another breakthrough is merely an extrapolation of present technology. CGI movies like Avatar use technology that can record live actors and convert them into CGI avatars in real time. On the set of Avatar in 2007, director James Cameron was able to look through a camera and see actors transformed into their Pandoran avatars in real time. In 2026, Meta can take a live moving image of you and convert it into an avatar in real time. As William Gibson says, the future is here, it's just unevenly distributed. When these innovations are more widely distributed, they will have vast effects. Presently, the social experience people have in networked computer games like World of Warcraft and in primitive virtual social environments like Second Life is limited by a lack of complex visual expressions. Human beings employ a subtle visual language of facial expressions as a major part of our social experience. Our approximately 42 facial muscles, more than any other species in terms of expressive range and social complexity, allow the subtlest change of expression to unfold in microseconds. When we can put on a pair of video display glasses and enter a world of avatars that are conveying the real-time fluctuations of other users' facial expressions, we will cross a major threshold where the virtual social experience will have far greater power. We do not, however, have to wait for the future to experience virtual realities or logos beheld languages. As Terence pointed out, language and culture were the first virtual realities. Also, we have created visually beheld languages. While it may not have all the complexities of a fully realized language, the international language of icons is not just in airports anymore. It's how we navigate the internet and our personal computers. American Sign Language, ASL, is a logos beheld language with great powers of evocation, inflection, and style. ASL poetry, poems that do not start as words but as visually beheld sequences of gestures, is a growing artistic movement. In a remarkable demonstration of the human drive toward logos beheld communication, deaf children in Nicaragua who had not been taught any sign language spontaneously created their own, entirely independent of ASL. Nature's virtual reality. In James Joyce's Ulysses, Stephen Dedalus tells us, "History is the nightmare from which I am trying to awaken." I would turn this around and say that history is what we are trying to escape from into the dream, said Terence McKenna. The dream time can be seen as a virtual reality environment where the expression of meaning transcends verbal language. Transcendence includes that which is transcended, so dreams don't need to exclude verbal language. Dreams often make very sophisticated use of language, employing double and triple entendres to create multiple layers of meaning in a single phrase. But dreams can also convey linguistic intent without any verbal content. The dreamtime environment can parallel, and dreamtime characters can personify meaningful content. The fluctuations of the dreamtime not only parallel the dynamism of inner process, they are inner process, psyche and universe becoming one. Matter in dreams is spiritualized and can come into being, disappear, or mutate in perfect accord with psychic need. T.S. Eliot popularized the term objective correlative to describe externalizations of inner states in literary text. An objective correlative could be any object, scene, event, or situation that stands for or evokes a particular mood, emotion, or inner state. For example, a wilted bouquet of roses in a poem may be the objective correlative of a disappointment in love. The dream time is a universe composed mostly of objective correlatives, a cauldron of objects, events, people, entities, and situations that evoke emotions and inner meetings without the intermediation of words. The language of dreams is not exclusively self-referential. Numerous well-documented cases of mutual or shared dreaming exist in which two or more people share a common dream. In my many years of interpreting dreams, I have heard a few reports of mutual dreaming and experienced one possible case myself. From William James' principle that one white crow is sufficient to disprove the notion that all crows are black, a single valid case of mutual dreaming across all human history indicates that the human species can use organic virtual reality as a language medium. However rare, the ultimate logos beheld language already exists. Quantum evolutionary change can happen both gradually and suddenly. The potential for a new means of consciousness and communication slowly develops until it begins emerging episodically in fits and starts. A great shock to the system, individual and or collective, may catalyze them into greater manifestation. Okay, I changed that sentence a little. A great shock to the system, individual and or collective, may catalyze an evolving capacity into greater manifestation. Whether through technology, organic evolution, or some combination thereof, shared virtual realities where we become our meanings are likely the most potent way for us to transcend verbal language. Perhaps Terence is right. One day we may awaken from the nightmare of history into a mutual dream time. Logos beheld cuts both ways. Terence's view of logos beheld communications parallels my early work on the singularity archetype. However, I disagree with Terence's assertion that logos beheld communication will eliminate deception and other forms of darkness. I think that some people will wake up from the nightmare of history into the nightmares of the dream time, or into nightmarish realms of virtual reality. As I mentioned earlier, novelty intensifies when there is a time of great transformation. The outer edges of both... Oops, gotta fix something. Where the outer edges of both light and dark usually intensify. Okay, that change. As Sophocles said, nothing vast enters the life of mortals without a curse. When I discussed my theories with Ram Dass many years ago, he expressed a point of view almost identical to Terence's. Ram Dass also believes that on the other side of the shift to the new means of consciousness and communication, it will be impossible to do evil. You would be aware that you were doing it to yourself, that there was only one of you, he told me. I would like to believe that Terence and Ram Dass are right, but I think they are only half right. I'll let Terence make his case in his own words. We are going to go from a linguistic mode that is heard to a linguistic mode that is beheld. When this transition is complete, the ambiguity, the uncertainty, and the subterfuge that haunts our efforts at communication will be obsolete, and it will be in this new environment of beheld communication that the new world of the Logos will be realized. And another Terence quote, the shared beholding of the same linguistic intention in an objectified manifold is a true union. We become as one mind with this style of communication. Language beheld could perhaps serve as the basis for a deeper web of interlocking understandings between human beings that would represent a kind of technically aided evolutionary forward leap of the species. Both Terence and Ram Dass have had the same crucial insight. A fully realized logos beheld language would, in some cases at least, fundamentally alter the separation of subject and object, and move things from what Martin Buber called the I-it relationship to the I-thou relationship. Indeed, the singularity archetype, as we'll discuss later, contains within its core an ontological shock to the ego's sense of self and other. Until it says this. Sorry. My view is that egoism, will to power, deceptive intentions, etc., are resilient forces that can adapt to a new means of communication and use visually beheld language diabolically. This is not conjecture. Every day we are bombarded with myriad examples of visually beheld deceptions called advertisements. What is that sexy airbrushed person in the glossy whiskey ad, if not the devil that hath the power to assume a pleasing shape? Ruthless advertisers, power-hungry politicians, and sexual vampires are among the types that already use visually beheld linguistic deception to manipulate people. I'm reminded of a skit I saw years ago on the Daily Show with Jon Stewart. A conglomerate of the big oil companies agrees to be interviewed by a Daily Show correspondent, but only if they can be represented by a 9-year-old girl. The 9-year-old girl, who has long blonde hair and is impossibly cute and charming, talks about how sad she feels when people say bad things about oil companies, etc. Similarly, the gorgeous female avatar you meet at a disco in Second Life is very likely an obese guy masturbating in front of his computer monitor. We already have deepfake technology working in political propaganda. A politician could have their face in a pre-recorded or even a live video shifted slightly to reflect the demographics of particular regions. For example, stations broadcasting to Hispanic precincts would get an image of the politician's face that had been subtly merged with some Hispanic faces. Research by Bellinson, Iyengar, Yee, and Collins has demonstrated that voters tend to prefer candidates whose faces have been digitally morphed to resemble their own. With enough computer power, a politician could morph their face slightly to resemble an individual viewer's. As a child, I was struck by the future of television as prophesized in John Brunner's 1968 Hugo Award-winning novel, Stand on Zanzibar. Great classic. TV could store personalized digital avatars called Mr. and Mrs. Everywhere. So, for example, if a couple were to see a Disney World commercial, they would see their own avatars embedded in the scene, joyfully riding rides and viewing attractions. As we'll see in a later section on successful prophecy in science and other fiction, Stand on Zanzibar was quite prescient in several of its visions of where we are in 2026, and this again was a novel written in 1968. Scanalyzer, the primary news service, delivers information in short, rapid bursts via an auto-shout system resembling modern social media feeds. Participant break-in allows viewers to interact with programs in real time, predating the internet, and all news is processed by Shalmanizer, a massive supercomputer for accuracy, anticipating AI-curated media. Actually, I wish we had such a supercomputer that would fact-check things, but we don't. And of course, many people there'd be possibilities for imposed bias and stuff if we did. About 20 years, Shelia's Dream, Heaven, Earth, and Demon Ride. About 20 years ago, a young intersex woman we'll call Sheila asked me to interpret an extraordinary dream she had with extreme relevance to the potential for darkness in virtual reality. The following is a very slightly edited version of a transcript I made of a recording of the dream interpretation session. In the interview, I merely asked clarifying questions because the dream largely spoke for itself without the aid of interpretation. Sheila. Sheila. The dream begins, and I'm at a friend's house, sort of a party house. A guy approaches me. He's not anyone I recognized from real life, a dream character, but someone I feel I can trust and that I have a connection with. He comes up to me and says, "There's this new stuff. You've got to try it." "Well, what is it?" I asked. "It's heaven," he said, but in a way that told me that there was no implication of anything religious. Heaven was just the name of some sort of drug. My friend is at a computer, and he's going to make this drug for me. It's extremely difficult to make. You have to make it on a computer, and you have to know physics and computer programming to make this drug. Jonathan, so how did you make a drug on a computer? Is it made out of zeros and ones? What is the computer doing to make it? Sheila, the computer program has access to a whole repertoire of chemicals. It's not a purely informational thing. It's spit out as a mixture of all these chemicals and molecules in a small capsule, very small, a little bit smaller than 1 centimeter squared. Jonathan, so the computer just makes one capsule at a time? Sheila, it could make several capsules, but with every particular program, there's only one. Each one is unique, and I could tell that my friend was putting a lot of effort into making my capsule. He finishes it, and I swallow the capsule. The trip was pretty indescribable. I went to some sort of alien world that was very beautiful. The colors were so vivid, almost too vivid. And we'll see this again in near-death experiences, the unique color theme. There were strange iridescent colors I've never seen before. Another unique thing is that everything I saw was in frames of about 1.5 feet. In every direction, I would see everything repeated to infinity in frames of about 1.5 feet. So when I looked at my arm, I would see it repeated in these artificial frames extending out to infinity. I know how absurd it sounds, but this was just beautiful. Okay, I'm going to make a note to put that into the NDE section as well. Jonathan, so everything you looked at had this telescoping effect as if it were an infinite chain of dominoes. But what is it that you are seeing in this environment? Okay. I don't know if I said that part of what she said. Another unique thing is that everything I saw was in frames about 1.5 feet. In every direction, I would see everything repeated to infinity in frames of about 1.5 feet. So when I looked at my arm, I would see it repeated in these artificial frames extending out to infinity. I know how absurd it sounds, but this was just beautiful. Jonathan, so everything you looked at had this telescoping effect, as if it were an infinite chain of dominoes. But what is it that you are seeing in this environment? Sheila, yeah, I saw plants that looked like belladonnas. They were very inviting, and my overall feeling was one of total euphoria. The sun was shining, or a star of some sort, and every sensation was really articulate. Within the dream, this trip lasted only between 10 and 30 minutes. When it was over, I wanted to know more about how this capsule was made and how it did this to me. My friend describes what it takes to start making your own. The duration of the trip can be anywhere between 2 minutes and 18 hours. He was also adamant about one point: how incredibly dangerous it was to design your own capsule if you didn't know what you're doing. He wouldn't let me even touch the computer. He told me what it would take to run the trip, which was pretty intensive. You couldn't just put in a bunch of lines and dots and squiggles and be like, there you go. Jonathan, so when he's describing a trip, he's not just deciding what chemicals go in, he's also designing the visual parameters. He's designing a whole virtual reality environment. Sheila, correct. So I'm talking further with my friend because I want to know more. And keep in mind, I'm still feeling some euphoria from just having had this trip. I asked him, how many different kinds of this stuff are there? And then my friend got quiet because he didn't want to say anything more, but eventually answered, there's only 3. He was fine to tell me about the first 2. The first was called Heaven, the one that I took, and the second was called Earth, and the third was called Demon Ride. Demon Ride was made for the sort of person who liked horror films. And then I thought to myself, wait a minute, this can last for up to 18 hours? What if someone gave it to you without your knowing about it or against your will? I was thinking about the implications of all this. I was still euphoric from my experience with heaven, but I wanted to know the full implications of this Pandora's box. As I went deeper into it, I became more disturbed. I realized that this was an odorless, colorless, tasteless substance that dissolves instantly in water, can last up to 18 hours, and there's no antidote. Once you've taken it, you have no choice but to let it run its entire course. Some people who like horror films could get together and design this H.P. Lovecraft, H.R. Geiger, Hellraiser type trip with demons coming after you and things that can't physically harm you, but that could be very psychologically traumatizing. And I'm thinking that if it were up to me, considering the benefits and the risks, I couldn't approve this drug. I was realizing what a Pandora's box this was, because on the one hand, people could have these great experiences, as I had, and heal psychological trauma, and I was only thinking about all the benefits until my friend told me about Demon Ride. Also, I realized there was no way you could outlaw this stuff. Once the program exists, it can be abused. It does take quite a level of skill with chemistry and computer programming to make these capsules, but someone who did have these skills could sit there at a computer making pill after pill of these utter horror shows. Jonathan, so you've discussed what heaven is like, the one you actually experienced, and you've also discussed Demon Ride, but what was the one called Earth like? Sheila, Earth was a so-so, nothing bad would happen, probably nothing good would happen, low intensity, mass market one that took very little skill to make. Low potency, doesn't last that long, half an hour at most, and it's sold in conventional places where alcohol would be sold, though people still charged an arm and a leg for it. But whichever of the three kinds you take, you're no longer experiencing this world. They all replace that with a different experience. What everyone was trying to work on was a way for you to process the real physical world while you were on the substance. When you're having the experience, it's not like your motor skills are paralyzed. You can still move your body, but you can't orient yourself to the real world. Also, a unique aspect of these capsules is that if you were to take two instead of one, those trips would run parallel to each other. Jonathan, so instead of magnifying each other or running consecutively, you have two individual trips running at the same time? Sheila, correct, and I tried that one time. My friend said, I'm going to give you a 2-minute trip of that because I don't want you to freak out. I'm going to give you something really straightforward. He gave me a 2-minute trip of skydiving plus a 2-minute trip of going to an ancient library. Jonathan, and which of the 3 capsules were these 2 capsules? Sheila, they were both heaven capsules. That's the only kind my friend would make. They are the highest quality. Heaven had the most clarity, the most purity, the cleanest sort of experience you could have with no traumatic after effects. Jonathan, so what was this simultaneous experience like? What did you see in the ancient library, for example? Sheila, there were all these flower of life symbols all over the place as if the whole thing were woven. Jonathan, what whole thing was woven? Sheila, the library itself, not the books. Jonathan, the library itself was woven. Can you explain that? Sheila, the library was woven with the symbol of life. Jonathan, so was the library a physical building with a marble floor, for example, and so forth? Sheila, yes. Jonathan, so in other words, the pattern of the tiles on the floor would be the flower of life, and the pattern of the drapes would be the flower of life, and so forth. Sheila, yes. So it was woven in the sense that it was a decorative motif that was repeated everywhere, but it wasn't literally woven out of the symbol. Sheila, yes. Jonathan, did you see any particular books, or was it just endlessly receding bookcases, or what? Sheila, actually there weren't books. There were scrolls. That's what I meant by an ancient library. And I never actually opened up any scrolls or tried to read them or anything. I was just dazzled by this old place that had the smell of old parchment. My hands were steady, and I would have been able to handle the scrolls, but my hair was just going everywhere because of the skydiving. Jonathan, so when you were seeing this ancient library, you were simultaneously having the kinesthetic sensations of skydiving. Sheila, yep. Jonathan, but were you only seeing the library or were you also seeing the skydiving? Sheila, seeing both superimposed on each other. Jonathan, so you're able to have two completely encompassing visual experiences at the same time. Sheila, sometimes it seemed like the library was less present, the floor seemed semi-transparent and would fade in and out. Jonathan, so it was as if you were experiencing two holograms at the same time that were bleeding into each other, and sometimes one or the other would be more vivid? Sheila, yes. When I woke up, the implications of Demon Ride were so intense that I was sweating, and I was beside myself because it seemed like something that was very feasible, that it would be possible at some point. What if someone gave an 18-hour version of Demon Ride to a child? What sort of psychological scars would that leave? And that ends the Logos Beheld chapter.